Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 73, Unique Genre Blend. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the 1998 film, Dark City. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing quite well, thanks. How are you?
Doing well, too. It's starting to get hot again.
Oh, it's going to be 110 here today, I think.
Ooh, yuck. Okay,
Yeah.
You win. And that's not really something you want to win.
No.
So as you're trying to keep cool on this incredibly hot day, what's new in your writing world?
Let's see, nothing new in the writing world, just the same. Slowly editing Zara 2. Yeah, that's it. What else is going on? What's new in your writing world?
Well, I have begun writing the third in my space opera series, The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. The third book is called Meridian, and I am 8% into the story.
Wow, that's awesome.
Except that, I'm already lost. So I am having to take a step back and do some things, which is fine. It's great. This is how sometimes I work. I write until I realize I need to do some world building here. I need to do some world infrastructure here. And so that's what I've been working on today, is some of that world building infrastructure stuff so that I can be consistent as I move forward. How often do you have to do that, the world building stuff?
It's a mix. Mostly I try to do it ahead of time before I start the story, but inevitably as I'm writing, I'll add things or I'll realize, I don't really know why this is this way. So I'll leave a little note to myself to figure that out and then come back to it later, or I kind of come up with ideas and flesh it out as I continue on writing. But mostly I try to do it ahead of time as much as possible, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah. Well, and I do it too, but I leave myself space to do some exploring as I'm working, because sometimes I find that actually helps inspire new elements to the story when I do the work.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need a little bit of that at least.
Yeah, for me. I mean, not everybody does that. There are some people who don't need that, or they approach it from a very different perspective. And to me, that's awesome. I love all the different ways that people can come to creating their worlds and creating their books. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So have you come across any interesting stories in books or movies or television lately?
Books or movies or TV? Let's see. I've been watching Star Wars Acolyte.
Oh, what do you think?
Disney Plus show. I'd say I'm moderately enjoying it. It's definitely not. It's not super compelling to me, but it's an entertaining enough watch. I have some, little nitpicks with it, but I'm going to see it through. I'll watch the whole series. I've seen online there's a lot of backlash to it, but that's everything these days.
Yeah.
So I'm just going into it with an open mind, and it's fine. It's definitely not the best of the Star Wars TV shows. What about you? What are you reading or watching?
I've started watching the new, very latest Doctor Who series. What is he? 15?
Oh yeah.
15th Doctor? Anyway, so I've started watching that because we're going to be talking about that in a few weeks. So, I've only seen one episode beyond sort of the Christmas special introduction episode, and I liked it. It's light. It's, not real heavy. I like this new doctor.
Okay.
I like the balance that this new doctor has between sort of lightness and yet the doctor-ishness that we've come to be comfortable with and expect. So far, just the one episode in, I'm liking it. It doesn't have a lot of the weight that some of the previous, especially the new iterations, were kind of weighty. And I'm not yet seeing any of that weight, but that's okay. And I also, I've been watching old Enterprise episodes, Star Trek Enterprise episodes, and I have found two that I really, really liked. Now, I think I'm in season 3. So maybe that's when they started to really gel in their storytelling. But there have been 2 episodes, I think they were back-to-back or close to back-to-back, that I was thinking, those are really good stories. I haven't watched them for years, if not maybe decades.
Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about Dark City?
Yes, I am. Let's do it.
Today we're talking about the story told in the 1998 film Dark City. And I'm going to read the synopsis that comes up on Google when you type in Dark City. John Murdoch awakens alone in a strange hotel to find he is wanted for a series of brutal murders. The problem is he can't remember whether he committed the murders or not. For one brief moment, he's convinced that he has gone completely mad. Murdoch seeks to unravel the twisted riddle of his identity. As he edges closer to solving the mystery, he stumbles upon a fiendish underworld controlled by a group of ominous beings collectively known as the Strangers. Did you like this movie?
I do like this movie. It's very creative and very unique. It's one of those movies that's unlike anything else I've ever seen. It's hard to find those sometimes. I don't think I could have come up with a story like this. It's really kind of out there. I like the way that it starts off very mysterious and then unveils things over the course of the story. I think they do a pretty good job at that. You don't really know exactly what's going on, and it takes a while to get there, which I was fine with. Dark City, I think, is a very spot-on name for the story. It's all very dark all the time, and it's about being in this city. Yeah, it's a very unusual story. I wouldn't necessarily say I think it's a great movie or a great story, but I like it in that it's unique. It tries something different. It's an interesting twist on aliens and how they interact with the people and setting up a different alien culture. What little of it we get to see in this universe. I think having Kiefer Sutherland play the Doctor character the way that he did, which was very weird, like just in his speech, his mannerisms, I think that was a good choice because it keeps us wondering as to that character's motivations, because he's sort of key to what's going on. He seems to be the one person in this city who actually knows what's happening, knows what's really going on behind the scenes. And it seems like, he's trying to work against the aliens, but you're not fully sure. And then, okay, yeah, he is doing that. But still, having that character be strange, I think, fits into the tone of this story. If he had just played it like a normal guy, like a noir detective or something like that, I don't think it would have worked. I think it would have pulled us out of the mood of that world. So I like that choice. And then you have on the other side of that, you do have the sort of noir detective guy who's detective trying to figure out what's going on. And I like how they slowly come to realize the world isn't what they thought it was. They start to question, like, hey, wait, why don't I remember this? How do you get to this place? And yeah, it's a very strange movie, but I enjoy it because of that. It still was engaging enough to me to want to continue watching it and want to find out what the mystery was and want to find out what these beings were up to and how they were keeping this place and manipulating it and why. Yeah, it leads you to it does it's the mystery, right? It like leads you to wonder what's happening, and that pulls you from one scene to the next. There are some interesting action scenes, but it's not really an action movie. It's more of like a, I don't know, like a weird drama looking at the human condition in a weird science fiction universe. But yeah, overall, I liked it. I wouldn't say, it's a fantastic movie, but I admire the effort to make something unique and to create something with a vision. So I think it succeeds from that perspective. I do have some issues with it, but overall, yeah, I liked it. What are your thoughts? What do you like about this story? And tell me, talk to me about what you think are the good aspects of the story, and then we'll get into what could be improved.
Well, I agree. I think it's a fascinating blend of genres. I wrote down, we've got your classic noir mystery, and then also a blend of science fiction, which, if there was, I don't know, like a 360-degree framework of genres, would you put science fiction like directly across noir mystery? I mean, like its most opposite genre? Yeah. And I'd be interested in your opinion here, because I do not enjoy horror, so I am not a horror fan nor an expert on horror, but it seemed to me that this also blended horror in with noir mystery and the science fiction. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are definitely elements of that. I think just by the fact that it's always dark and there's always like this looming threat, and the characters are trying to survive, particularly the main character that we're following. He doesn't know what's going on, and his life is constantly a threat. And there's these weird beings who have so much power and control. They almost serve as the monster, in a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I did get some feelings of Hellraiser from this, from the outfits of the aliens and the way their teeth kind of chatter. Those like straight from Hellraiser. So I do see what you're saying. And also there's murders that are happening, that are going on, and mind manipulation and things like that. So I definitely see what you're talking about. That's certainly an aspect of this. And I think you're right. I think it's one of the genres that's blended into here.
Yeah. So I thought, that was unbelievably interesting to have this blend of these genres. You see sci-fi and horror, and you can see noir mystery and horror blended together. To put all three of them together with a smattering of some romance, though the romance is so light, I'm almost afraid to say it, because it's just like this very light level on top.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's there. And it was one of the things that helped me root for our main character, John Murdoch, was this sort of steadfast relationship that was in place, that was grounding for him. But what was grounding for me was the noir detective, the William Hurt character. I was constantly sort of gravitating towards that character, because that character seemed to be the most grounded and the one that was helping me understand the world better than, I will say, that, John Murdoch, sort of the main protagonist, and Dr. Schreiber, which is the Kiefer Sutherland character, who I think was very well portrayed. But those two characters were a little off-putting, so the William Hurt detective was like where I would go to say, okay, help me understand what's going on in this story. And I really liked that element of that. And I found the end very satisfying. We finally, it was almost like in the last 20 minutes that we got all the questions answered. And then the path forward. And that was when we went into full sci-fi mode. Right? Instead of mystery mode where you find out who the killer is and you get all the revelations and that's the end of the story, we got all the revelations, and then we went into full sci-fi and had the action that resolved the sci-fi conflict. in the story. And so I found that very satisfying at the end of that, because I'm a sci-fi fan. So I really like that. That to me, that brought me a sense of relief after a very sort of intense first, second, and even third act. It certainly lives up to its name, like you said. It's a very dark world. I think that the setting of this sort of 30s noir setting for this was fascinating. It was recognizable and familiar, and yet not. And I thought that raised some really good tension in the story. I thought that was a really great choice for the story, because it was very familiar. There is a lot of movies that are set in this time frame, 30s and 40s, that are comfortable, sentimental, even reminiscent of what's supposed to be a golden time. And so to have this be so off kilter was, I think, a really good choice. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a good note. Yeah, it's because it's very unnerving, right? And
yes.
Even the location itself is constantly changing.
Yeah.
So it's not like this stable, safe place where you kind of expect. I think you also had a good point about two of the characters being sort of the grounding for us as the viewer. You've got the detective, who's pretty straightforward, right? He's like a detective. He plays it like a detective that you would normally expect in that type of universe, in sort of the noir universe. And then we sort of are getting the unveiling of the world through that character. And then you also have the love interest, who, like you said, is very steadfast. She's on his side, and she's with him the whole time. She knows he's not committing this. And I think that helps us be a little bit more at ease with the main character. Because you start off, you don't know. You don't know, is this guy a serial killer? Like, what's really happening? So I think having those two characters helps seed us into the world a little bit more comfortably than otherwise. Otherwise, it would just be even more unnerving and like you said, potentially off-putting.
Was there anything that you would have done differently as a writer?
Yeah, this is a hard one, because it's such a unique vision that, like I said, I don't think I could come up with something like this. It's very unusual, the concept and the way that they made it. But looking at it as a viewer, there's a couple things that I felt I would change. One is a very small thing. When the detective and the protagonist's wife find him after he'd gone to his uncle's, they drive up in the car as he's running away. Like, how did they find him? They were going to the uncle's house, and the guy had left. He was running across buildings, and now all of a sudden they're right there, right where he needed him to be. I would have liked to have seen them go to the house and have them see him run away or something. Some kind of explanation for that. It's a really small thing, and in the rush of the story, you kind of gloss over it. But I was just like, where did they come from? How did they know he was here? So that was one thing. And then another thing was, at the very beginning, I would not have had the opening voiceover explaining that the aliens had come to Earth and kidnapped people. I think that was explained well enough in the story, within the movie, and I think it would have been a more interesting reveal when you get there and like, oh, there's these alien creatures and this is what's going on, versus already knowing that up front. My guess is they probably put that in after using test audiences who were completely confused. So maybe I'm wrong, but for me, I don't think it was necessary, so I would have left that off. Outside of that, it's so strange. It's hard to think of how to even change it, what would improve it. I guess I might put a little bit more, like maybe a little bit more grounding, because we kind of get touches of people who sense that there's something going on, right? The other detective, I forget what his name was, who seems to be going crazy, but he kind of has a glimpse of the truth and what's going on. So we get that that's out there. I like the way that they unveiled that, but maybe something a little bit more solid to latch on to. For me, I say this for just about everything that's dark and serious. A little bit of humor, just one or two little notches to like lighten the mood a little bit at some point, maybe would have worked. I don't know. I wouldn't want to break the style of the story, but I would probably have put just a couple little things in to give you a chuckle or a smirk or something. But those are the things that I noted. What would you have improved?
I found this story very confusing. And I was also very put off by, I agree with you about the voiceover. This doctor that we meet immediately. This is the first character we meet, is the doctor with his voiceover. He is not a likable character. He is not someone that I could relate to. And then we immediately go to John Murdoch, who is also not someone I could immediately relate to, because did he murder a prostitute? So I found it very difficult to be connected to the story through the characters, because I didn't have a pair of eyes that I could relate to and saw how the story was unfolding through their eyes. And so from that perspective, and I would be really interested in hearing what you have to say about this, because you already kind of mentioned this a little bit, and I kind of laughed. You were like, they didn't use the classic detective perspective, and I actually think that the story might have been better told had it been through the detective's perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking of that as you were talking about it. Maybe something more like The Fugitive, where you see it from Tommy Lee Jones' perspective as he's investigating this. So we get a more grounded person who, you're riding along with.
Yeah.
Through this weird story.
Yeah.
And he just thinks this guy's guilty. And then all these weird things start popping up where it's like, wait, this doesn't make sense, or this wasn't the way that I remember it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that probably would have worked better and helped the audience ease into the story a bit more.
Yeah, and I think it could have been really interesting to, for example, introduce the other detective's name was Walensky, I think.
Yeah, that sounds
right. And his investigation of what was going on here led him to realize the truth, the sci-fi truth of this murder mystery. And I think we could have had the detective be brought into the case, try to interview Walensky, have Walensky speak the truth of the story right at the beginning. And then but he'd be dismissed because he's clearly insane. And then have, the William Hurt inspector start doing his inspector thing. And I think having the wife show up, Emma, having her, in this movie, she was actually almost a bit of a two-dimensional character. There was really not much there of her. I would have loved to have seen her be a little bit more three-dimensional, have her be sort of suspicious, classic noir, have her be a little bit, sultry, have her be a little suspicious. John Murdoch is suspicious. Dr. Schreiber, have him be a little suspicious, right? And have the detective not knowing who exactly is telling him the truth. And that could have been absolutely fascinating as he dug all this up, and then discovered the sci-fi root cause of all of this. Would have just been absolutely fascinating. The other thing that I thought was incredibly frustrating was that this character, John Murdoch, who is, suspected of being, suspected of these murders, has this special power. How did he get that power? There was no explanation of that. That was one area of this whole sci-fi element that I found very disappointing. There was not even a hint of a sort of a logic trail for us to follow that this human got the same powers as the strangers, as this species that kidnapped all these humans to try to save themselves. All of the framework of this story made no sense. They were kidnapped to try to figure out how to stop themselves dying by studying human memories to see if they could find the human soul. And oh no, this particular human got their powers. It made no sense. How does studying their memories save their species? How did this human get this power? And then, for example, when they want to keep this human, or they want to understand how this human got their powers, because theoretically they're losing their powers and their species are dying, but when this human gets their powers, they want to kill him instead of studying him. It made no sense. And then why did the one try to eat his fingers? The sci-fi elements, I think, were not well crafted. I think it goes back to kind of what you and I were talking about at the beginning of this podcast. The world building was not done.
Yeah, I feel like there was probably more explanation and it didn't make it into the movie. I didn't watch the director's cut, so I'm wondering if there's more of that in there. I don't know. Because I was feeling, you're right, I was feeling some of the same things. Why he got his power. The explanation that the doctor character gave was, oh, he evolved. Like, what? That doesn't, that's not how it works. So I kind of made up my own explanation for some of that. I assumed that the doctor injected him with some of their memories or DNA or something at some point. Because that's the only thing that would kind of explain it, but that was definitely not in the movie. And then same thing, why are they studying the humans? It kind of mentioned they want to. It seemed like they wanted to know how to live among humans. Like they were going to go back to Earth and be in their society or something. That didn't really make sense for what they were doing. Like you said, why all this weird torture-y stuff that you're doing? It didn't really make sense.
And so it was almost like the noir part was incredibly well fleshed out, and the sci-fi part wasn't.
Yeah. I love your idea of running it through the detective's perspective, at least at the start, up through, maybe a little bit to where we're introduced to the John character.
Introduced to the idea that the John character is not a murderer, so that we can then relate to him. I think
exactly. Because then we could see him, we could see sort of weird stuff being introduced, right? He meets the John character, and then he sees him using his tuning or whatever they called it, power, and you're like, whoa, what is that? How does this guy have it? And then I would have liked some explanation for why that is. I mean, It would have made sense if Kiefer Sutherland had found some way to blend their DNA to this guy, or even just inject him with one of those things, and that gave him the power. That would have been hand wavy and fine for me for this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as there had been that explanation, because otherwise, why just this one dude?
So, did you derive any themes from Dark City?
I think there's a couple things going on. I mean, there's certainly elements of, not giving up and seeking the truth. It's sort of a mystery story, right? At least at the beginning, like you said. Well, up through most of the story is a mystery story. So there's this searching and trying to find out what's going on and the nature of what's around you. I think that's part of it. Ultimately, what I settled on, though, was more about the soul, right? So I would say their message is the human spirit cannot be identified through scientific experiment. It seems like that's what they were going for, and ultimately it was the human spirit, right? That need to know and survive and be free, push through at the end. So that's what I came up with. What do you have?
Almost exactly the same thing. I have man is more than the sum of his memories.
Yeah, perfect.
When I was looking at sort of better understanding this movie, I was doing a little bit of research on when the movie came out, how the movie was received. And one of the things that I read was that there was some comparison of this movie with Blade Runner, which you can kind of see because there's a very noir feeling for Blade Runner too, though the sci-fi is right in your face. And Blade Runner, of course, is about the groundingness of memories and how memories can make you who you are. So then there we have this story, which is a little bit about how your man is more than their memories. And I thought that was a really interesting continuation of sort of that concept that Blade Runner examined.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Blade Runner is also about exploring humanity and what it means to be human. And we definitely see some of that here too.
Yeah, exactly. So as a writer, what is your takeaway from Dark City?
Let's see. My takeaway is don't afraid to be a little bit weird. I think sometimes, you want to write a story. Certainly as an independent author, you hear a lot of advice saying, study your genre, write to market, write the tropes that people want to read. And I think a lot of that is good advice. But to stand out, I think sometimes you need to do something different, or at least blend something different. And this definitely blends different things, as we talked about earlier on. You can argue to the success of that. I think you pointed out a number of significant flaws and ways that this could be improved. But generally, I think I think it's good, stretch your creative muscles and try something a little unusual. What is your writing takeaway?
I agree. I think that there is a great deal of value in trying the unusual, because while people do like the tropes and the frameworks that they're used to in their stories, they also like the novel and the new. So it's worth it to experiment and try something new. However, to me, the most important thing to take away from this movie is that when you do that something new, you really need to take a step back and make sure it makes sense. To me, this story suffered from what I call the forest for the trees problem, which is they were so deep in their story, they didn't realize that some of it didn't make sense. And they had to get out of the forest and look at it from that 30,000 foot level to make sure it made sense from the perspective of somebody who had no knowledge of this story at all. And I think that would have done it a world of good. So to me, that's a great lesson to remember. I get very into my stories. I know what's supposed to happen. I understand what it is that I'm trying to communicate, but I need to take a big step back, get back up to that 30,000 foot level and see if I actually did it.
That's great.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the 1998 film, Dark City. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we climb into the Wayback Machine and talk about the story told in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.